Hello, this is Dr. Nazare coming to talk to you about another aspect of psychology today. This is a subject that there's a lot of talk about. It's in the general public, usually used inappropriately, the label, and usually used with a lot of judgment and criticism. And my leitmotif is to not be critical and not be unkind. So I think it's important to give it a more broad view that is not so critical and has a little bit more of an explanatory nature to it. So the subject is narcissism. I've seen books and YouTubes out there that talk about narcissism as something really awful and that nobody would want to tell that they are because there's so much rejection. So I want to give you a little bit of information about what it is. And either today or the next time I'll tell you a little bit more how it comes to be. And I definitely want to emphasize kindness so that people who are narcissistic are actually suffering. And I also want to emphasize that as most things in human beings, there's a spectrum. So you could have a little bit of narcissistic traits, or you could have quite a bit, or you could have extreme narcissistic traits. So please know that there are a range of characteristics that can be from mild to moderate to severe. And when you think about yourself or other people, keep that in mind. And don't just label a person narcissistic without considering these subtleties. Because again, human beings were so complex that there's a lot of variability. So it's the difference between, in the color gray, at the darkest color it's almost black, and at the lightest color it's almost white. So think of that color gray, and think of narcissistic traits or narcissistic personality as going in that range. So what about narcissism do I want to tell you? So number one is try and look at it with some kindness, that people who actually suffer from this actually suffer, and that it is typically the result of how you were brought up, how you were treated as a child. And so that if you understand that, and if you understand that these people were originally children who were affected by various conditions that left them in this place, maybe that will mellow your judgment of them or perhaps do away with it altogether. So let me tell you a little bit about narcissism. Well, number one, there is a tremendous need, a hunger for recognition. So there is unfortunately, the hunger is usually kind of limitless. So people who are successful narcissists can achieve great things because they're pushed to the maximum to be the best. So they need to be very good, they need to be the best, they need to be the top. And part of the sad thing is that if they're not, and of course nobody can be that all the time, we can only be that at times, any of us, even those who have quite a bit of ability or skill or intelligence, we can't be the best all the time. That's impossible. So already you can see how to have this personality type would be a problem, because you're going to be having many times when you're not the most important or the best. And when that happens, a person who has narcissistic personality feels like they're absolutely worthless. So know that. So they have a hunger for recognition that is kind of limitless, and they're very self-preoccupied. They have an inordinate amount of self-preoccupation, but they're preoccupied with their image. They're not preoccupied with their psychology per se or other people. They're preoccupied with their image. And the image has to be one of three characteristics. It has to be beauty, wealth, and now I'm not remembering the other one. But beauty, wealth, let me see, I think I have a fame. I forgot that one. Like I was saying earlier, you have to be very important. So obviously being famous makes you important, and so they're preoccupied with that, beauty, fame, and wealth. So that is what they're looking to be recognized for, those items. So as a result, there is nothing of substance. It's something that is very superficial. And so they substitute these very superficial characteristics for something of substance. What would be of substance? Integrity, honesty, kindness, compassion. Those are characteristics of substance. But these characteristics that they're looking to have and that they're desperately to receive recognition for are very superficial. As a result, they actually suffer from feeling emptiness on the other side of the grandiosity that is compensatory, by the way, I'll explain in a minute. But internally, they actually feel like there's a word that various patients have talked to me about called like imposter syndrome. You've probably heard of this somewhere. And they feel like they are imposters inside. They would never tell you this, but they feel like they're imposters. They feel empty and they feel loveless inside. So again, to have compassion is important, that this is what's going on. They're not very attractive people in their personality because they're so self-preoccupied and because they're so preoccupied with being great and big and wealth and beauty and these things. So it's not very attractive. And they also need to be the best, so they're very competitive. And that's something that is not very attractive to most people. But while it's not very attractive to perhaps be friends or be partnered with somebody like this, for these particulars, it is important that we understand that these particulars of grandiosity, high achievement, being very wealthy, being very beautiful, they're all compensatory traits. They're to compensate for how they really feel inside, and how they really feel inside is the exact opposite. So they feel small, they feel unimportant, they feel loveless, they feel like they're imposters. And why is that? Because they invest a lot in their image. And the image is what's called a persona. And the persona is not really who they are. So another thing I want to tell you about people with narcissistic personalities or narcissistic traits is something that will help you understand who is and who isn't, or who is presenting with narcissistic traits or not. And one thing that I recognized very early on in my training, not very, very early, but maybe midway through perhaps having my first doctorate or something like that, is that one key characteristic of somebody who's narcissistic is that they can never be vulnerable. Because being vulnerable is considered to them as weak. So they can be vulnerable. So what is vulnerable? Let me clarify that. Vulnerable is the vulnerable emotions, which are being sad, being confused, feeling lost, feeling jealous, feeling disappointed, feeling afraid. Those are vulnerable emotions. Narcissists will not tell you about any of those emotions. They will not recognize that they have difficulty taking responsibility also, which means they have difficulty apologizing. Why? Because apologizing means they've done something wrong. And they cannot tolerate having done something wrong. They cannot tolerate making a mistake. And to apologize means that you recognize you've made a mistake. So what is not vulnerable? What are the feelings and emotions that a narcissist presents without any problem? They do have emotions, of course, but they won't tell you about the vulnerable ones. They will present anger. Anger is not vulnerable in the slightest. So they can quickly get angry. They also tend to be retaliatory. So their ego is actually very fragile. Remember that this grandiosity, this self-importance is all compensatory, meaning it compensates for the real self. Not the persona, which is grand and big and powerful and beautiful, but the real self. So because of that, they have to keep that all hidden. So they're unlikely to be able to tell people when they're scared or they're sad or they're hurt. They can't talk about that. Instead, for example, if they break up in a relationship, they will tend to get angry at the person and maybe find a way to get back at them. If somebody makes a comment that makes them feel in some way inferior, which is, by the way, another characteristic of narcissistic personalities is that they're very easily injured. They very easily feel criticized. Remember earlier on, I talked about the criticism club. Well, people who have narcissistic traits or that have narcissistic personality are actually for sure members of the criticism club. Why? Because they're actually very fragile. Even though they appear the opposite, they're actually very sensitive to feeling criticized. So when they feel criticized, they feel like their value has dropped. And they feel like you've attacked them. You may not have attacked them. You may have just made an observation. But they're so easily feeling criticized and feeling attacked that they will find a way to retaliate and make you feel bad and put you down and perhaps even try to humiliate you because they feel humiliated by the simple comment of something they've done that you didn't like or that was wrong in any way. they feel very rejected and attacked by these things. So one thing I want to give you today is, first of all, this kind of overview of what is it to be narcissistic personality, the fact that there is a tremendous range from mild to severe, and that no matter what level of narcissism that human being has, the key thing that I came to realize that is kind of a guiding factor that can guide you is the lack of ability to be vulnerable. So for example, somebody who has been broken up with, rather than say that they're hurt or that they're sad or that they're depressed, they will say, they can actually say that they're happy it's over. Because what they do is pretend that they didn't like that person or even make negative comments about the person, rather than show you that they're hurt, that they're injured, and that they're very sad or very brokenhearted. They won't talk about that. So they can be happy, they can be expansive, but they cannot be vulnerable. And that's a key characteristic. So the other thing that connects to the criticism club, of course, is that they're very, very sensitive to anything that could imply a criticism of them. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. So key comments to keep in mind is that they have a hunger for being recognized, that it is not recognized across the board. It's recognition for things that are powerful, that are valued by them, which is beauty, wealth, and I keep forgetting the other one. What is the other one? Fame. I always forget fame. By the way, I've told you before and I'll tell you again, fame is not what matters to me. So I am doing this in a very non-narcissistic way because I happen to be very low, if any, on narcissism. That's why I was able to tell you from the beginning that I wasn't knowing what I'm doing here. I actually know a little bit more what I'm doing here. I've gotten used to these videos. I hope you're enjoying them. But my motivation is not to become famous. I have no interest in that whatsoever. My motivation is to help people. So what I feel recognized by and value is, for example, if I'm told that what I've said or done has helped somebody. That makes me feel good. If I were driven by a narcissistic personality, what would matter to me is how many views I get and how important I get, and whether you think I'm beautiful or that I'm hyper intelligent, things like that. By the way, intelligence is not one of their biggies. The biggest is the being famous, is the being wealthy, and the being beautiful. So it is very typical for narcissistic people to be very focused on exercise and be very focused on their appearance. Again, it's their appearance that matters, but underneath that appearance, there's somebody very, very vulnerable. So I want to end by saying that these people actually suffer. It's a very lonely way of being because you can't tell people about what's difficult and what's sad and what's vulnerable. So as a result, you feel very alone, and they actually feel kind of loveless. Oh, before I forget, another characteristic of narcissistic personalities is that they're actually kind of inaccessible emotionally. They're not warm and open emotionally. And now you can begin to understand a little bit more why. Since they have to present this persona of power and strength, they cannot really be open and warm to vulnerable experiences in other people. So they tend to lack empathy. So that's it for today. I hope this is helpful. I really, really hope that you ask me questions and make comments, because this is a subject that is out there in the air all the time in books and in YouTubes and all over the place. And unfortunately, many of my fellow colleagues, psychologists and psychotherapists, actually talk about narcissism with a lot of rejection and a lot of criticism, and looking at them like some despicable human. And I am very much against that. That's a pet peeve of mine. These people suffer, so they deserve our compassion, even if we don't like them very much. I want to end with that. So again, I hope this is helpful. Please tell me if you have any questions or comments. I'll be happy to respond to that. And be well and have a good afternoon or morning or evening, whatever this is. And I will see you soon. Bye-bye.